Hey everybody, welcome to my shop. Today we're going to talk about how to set up a new chisel, and in particular a new Japanese chisel. This is an Iyoroi blue steel laminated cabinet maker's chisel from Miki, Japan. It's handmade, hand forged, and it really seems to be good quality. It's an entry level chisel, I'd say, a higher end entry level chisel. It's about $75. Which is about on par with a good Lee Nielsen or Veritas chisel. I wanted to try it out. I've never used a Japanese chisel before. Today I'll go over some of the reasons I chose this, some of the differences between a Japanese chisel and a Western chisel, maybe some of the benefits, and I'll also talk about the different types of steel alloys, blue steel and white steel, and how it's made. Now what we want to do when we get a new chisel, it seems really sharp already, and most of them do when they come from the factory, but they're not ready to go yet. We have to set this hoop on the back, which supports the wood for hammering. You tend to use a steel hammer with a Japanese chisel, and you don't want to split the back end. And you also need to lap the bottom of the steel to a high polish and sharpen it. Now, I was pretty impressed with the craftsmanship on this. The bottom is already polished, not as high as I'd like it, but it seems like it came with a good bevel, a good polish. It's well balanced, and with this boxwood handle, I think it's really nice. It's a little bit different than the traditional red oak handles that you find on these. I like the way it looks better. I'm not the hugest fan of oak, and I figured if I buy a chisel, I want one that's nice to look at. So this is a 15mm chisel. It's just over ½ inch. It's the size I tend to use when I'm working the most. I was going for a 12mm, which is about close to ½ inch, but they were sold out. So I went with this one, and we'll get going on it, get it sharpened up, get it ready to use, and we'll see what these things are all about. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is get this ring off the back. Now I already started knocking it off lightly with a hammer. That will cause this tang and ferrule to come loose sometimes. That's okay, it's made to do that. You set it off to the side. Now what you do is, with some light hammer strikes, work around this ring to try to knock it off. Okay, so after about a few minutes I was able to get this ring off there. Now the next step you want to do is, there's some little indents from where they set this with a little chisel when it first went on there to keep it from sliding on all the way. You want to go in here with a small round file and clean out some of those little mill marks. Okay, so it seems like I got most of these mill marks and dents out. The next step we're going to want to do is tap the side of this handle to compress the wood a little bit, and then we'll tap this ring on to about a 1/16 inch past the end, and we're going to soak it in some water for about 5 minutes, and then we'll roll over the wood to keep this from coming off. Alright, so now we tap this out with a hammer. What that's going to do is compress these wood fibers, and it's going to let us get this ring on. After we do that, we'll put it in some water and let it re-expand, and that'll help keep this on. I sanded the end of this to take the lacquer off it so that it would soak up water. And so what you want to do is just lightly tap as you turn this. Then we're going to put this ring back on. are going to put this ring back on. Okay, so I put the ring on. I had to tap it back off. It was still a little bit too tight of a fit. So what I'm going to do is take a tiny bit off this with my knife. Around the edge where it was seated before. Just enough to help it slip back on. Okay, now we're going to tap it out again. And we'll try this again. Okay, it looks like it's a perfect fit. Got almost a 1/16 of wood sticking out the end. So we'll go ahead and put that in some water for about 5 minutes, and then we'll round over the wood to hold the ring on. So I wasn't able to get a video of me rolling over the end of this chisel with my hammer, but it doesn't take very long. You just go around the outside edge. It takes about a minute or two. It's easy while it's wet. And then your ring is set for the life of the chisel. So before sharpening, I want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons I got a Japanese chisel and how the steel is different than a normal Western chisel. Now, usually with Japanese knives or chisels, they're going to come in a white steel, which would be a white steel number 1, white, or also called white paper steel, or white paper steel number 2, and then a blue steel. Now this chisel is blue steel. The difference is that white steel is a high carbon content steel. It's about 1.5% carbon. It makes it very strong and allows it to get to a very, very sharp edge. Blue steel is a high carbon steel, but it has tungsten and chromium added to it, and it has better edge retention than white paper steel does. White paper steel is known for getting extremely sharp. It's used in a lot of paring tools and in softwoods. The blue steel, since it holds its edge a little bit more, it's kind of like an A2 steel on the Western chisel side. It's good for hardwoods and abrasive woods and holds its edge a little bit better. It's a little bit more brittle, but it can also, blue steel number 2 can also get an extremely sharp edge as well. So depending on what you're doing, since I work in a lot of hardwoods, I went with the blue steel. It's harder for them to temper. There's not as many makers that make blue steel. I won't say it's a little bit more sought after, but it just depends on what you're going to be working on. Now, this chisel is laminated, which means it has blue steel, a thin layer of blue steel on the bottom, forge welded by hand, hand hammered, to the top, which is a softer iron, and sometimes they'll make it out of anchor chains or other steel that's a softer, lower carbon steel, and they'll hammer them together so that just the bottom and the front edge of your chisel where you're going to be using it is the hard steel, and it's easier to sharpen because a good percentage of the chisel is softer steel. So you're not going to put a micro bevel on one of these to help it sharpen faster, because since it has a laminated body to the blade, it will already sharpen fairly quick. So I'll show you a couple other things on this chisel that make it a little bit different, and then we'll get to sharpening. Now you can see right here on the chisel blade, there's two different colors. You can see the lighter color harder blue steel on the bottom and the darker colored line where the top is made of soft steel. This chisel also has tapered sides that come down and allow you to get into tighter corners with the side without marring your work. And that's a benefit to me, especially when doing dovetails. So that's one of the main differences between this and a normal Western chisel, and one of the reasons why I chose this chisel. I'll flip it over. Now the back has hollow grinds in it. You can see these two troughs, they're ground out, and what that does is leaves you enough steel to reference off of on the wood, but takes some of the steel out the back so that when you lap it or flatten the back, it doesn't take as long. And that's another benefit. So we'll get set up and I'll show you how to sharpen this. So I have a few Japanese water stones here that have been soaking, and I've already flattened them with my stone flattening plate. When I lap the back of this chisel, which means that I'm going to flatten it, I'll start on a 1000 grit stone, see how that does. I don't think I'm going to have to be on it for very long. If it's a little bit too aggressive, I'm going to move to my 4000 grit and then finish the lapping on my 8000 grit. Then we'll move on to sharpening the bevel. Start on the 1000, 4000, finish on the 8000 with the stones, and then I'll use my lapping compound, my green, it's like a stropping compound, on a piece of MDF to get the final shine. So I'm going to get a little bit of water on this stone. What we'll do is we'll start with the back, hold it flat to the stone, and we're going to run it across, back and forth. You can see some of the steel starting to come out in the swarf of the water. Okay. Now I'm just checking the scratch pattern on here to make sure I've covered the whole back with the same scratch pattern, which means it's flat. And it looks like I have, which is pretty impressive. I kind of expected it to go fast because there's not a lot of steel on the back because of these hollow grinds, but it just means that it came from the manufacturer already flat, which is always a good thing, and it just shows a higher craftsmanship. Some Western chisels you get, even if you spend decent money on them, will take a long time to flatten. So I'll move to the 4000 grit now. And I almost have a shine all the way across. Just a moment. And I just have a little bit more to go. So I can go a little bit longer before I have to reflatten this stone. So if the back's perfectly flat and the bevel's perfectly flat, then you're gonna have a sharp edge all the way across. Now if you don't, you'll never get that edge super, super sharp. Now it looks like I'm almost there. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to move on to the 8000 grit. Okay, so now we'll move on to the 8000 grit for the final polish. Start on the front edge, front maybe third of the chisel. And kind of work it in a little bit farther as you go. It looks like that back is flattened, so I'm happy with that, and we can go onto the bevel. That's the fastest I've ever flattened the back of a chisel. That was pretty impressive. Yeah, I reflattened my stones. Now we're going to start working on the bevel. So we'll just pull this back. You can see that little line. There was a little bit of a hump in the middle of the bevel, so it's going to be getting that first. It should widen out here. I'm going to flip it over. Make sure that grind mark is in the center, which it is. So that means my angle is right. Typically, you would hand sharpen your Japanese chisels, but the initial sharpening I'm going to do with this jig because it was hard to reference the bevel with that hump. I want to give myself a good reference for the rest of the sharpenings I do in the future. You're going to go until the whole bevel has the same striations and grind marks on it. Okay, so next up is the 4000 grit stone. Now I forgot to mention, I didn't come off of the 1000 grit stone on the bevel until I felt a slight burr on the back side, which means that it's sharpened all the way to the edge. It's very hard to feel, but you don't want to move to the next stone until you feel that burr, because then you're not sharpened all the way across. So now we'll get on this 4000 grit stone. We'll drag back until we start getting some material from the blade, the metal deposit, that goes full width. And then I'll check the other side to make sure the whole bevel is polished. And you just want to take your time once you get up into the higher grits. You don't want to go real fast and then catch the bevel, catch the edge of the chisel in your stone and chip your stone out and ruin the edge of your chisel and have to start all over. Then it'll take even longer. Okay. Now, we still have some more to go. I have a shine in the middle. Okay, so I ended up going to my 8000 grit stone off camera. I needed to charge the battery, so for sake of time, I repeated the same process I did on the 4000 on the 8000. Now I feel like my 4000 is giving me a better polish than my 8000, and sometimes that happens with Japanese stones. The different manufacturers, it acts more like an 8000, and the 8000 acts more like a 4000. But I am going to be switching to diamond stones, coarse, medium, and fine, here in the near future. Then I can come off the fine stone right to a strop. I don't have to soak them, they stay flat, and they're more consistent. But this is still very consistent, it just takes a little bit more work. So I'm going to do a few swipes back on this 4000 just to get a final polish on that edge, and then I'll go onto my MDF with stropping compound to give me that mirror finish. Okay, some fresh compound on here. I think we're gonna call that good. Now I will flatten the back again. Just take that bird off. We should have an incredibly sharp edge, and it feels really, really sharp. So I think we're good to go. Try it out. Yeah, it's leaving a glass smooth finish, which is really nice. I'm happy with that. Glass smooth finish. It's a nice chisel. Alright, so thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really impressed with this so far. I'm definitely going to have to use it more to see how it works when I'm paring or chopping, but right now, the way it went on that end grain was the sharpest chisel I've ever used, and really look forward to using it more. I'll let you know how it goes. Thank you very much.